Good morning, class. My name is Mikaela Fojas from Bachelor of Science in Criminology 1-4. And here's the topic that I will discuss today: Phrenology and Nature Theory. First, we will discuss phrenology. What is phrenology? From ancient Greek, phren means the mind and logos means study or knowledge, according to Wikipedia. If we say phrenology, it's about studying our mind or our brain. Phrenology, also considered as a pseudoscience, means involve the measurement of bump on the skull to predict mental traits. If we say mental traits, it is the behavior and personality of the person. Study of conformation of the skulls based on the belief that it is indicative of mental faculties and character. It means how the skull form accordingly with formation of the skull which indicate what ability it has at the same time the character. Next, proponent and concept of phrenology. Like I said lately, it is the study of conformation of the skull as indicative of mental faculties and trait of character, especially according to the hypothesis of Franz Joseph Gauss, 1758 to 1828, and such 19th century adherents as Johann Caspar Spenzheim, 1776 to 1832, and George Combe, 1788 to 1858. First, Franz Joseph Gauss was a German neuroanatomist, psychologist, and pioneer in the study of localization of mental function in the brain. Claimed as the founder of the pseudoscience of phrenology, Gall was an early and important researcher in his field according to Wikipedia. So, Franz Joseph Gall was the first person who discovered and studied the phrenology. Basic tenet of Gall's system: the brain is the organ of the mind. The mind is composed of multiple distinct innate faculties. Because they are distinct, each faculty must have a separate seat or organ in the brain. The size of an organ, other thing being equal, is a measure of its power. The shape of the brain is determined by the development of the various organs. As the skull takes its shape from the brain, the surface of the skull can be read as an accurate index of psychological the various organs. It says like they say that according to Gauss is how the skull size it is, it also the size of brain you have. Gauss' collaboration with his pupil Johann Caspar Surpain led him to the development of his theory concerning brain localization and phrenology, which he initially referred to as cranioscopy. So, Johann Caspar Spenzheim helped Franz Joseph Gall to develop the phrenology. Gall's lecture of cranioscopy became very popular. His follower who gave his doctrine the name phrenology. So it wasn't Franz Joseph Gall who discovered the name phrenology. It is or create the word or create the name phrenology. It is because of his follower who gave this name to him, to his work. George Combe is George Combe, a spokesman of the phrenological movement for 20 years. So, George Combe is the spokesperson of phrenology over 20 years. Two of them are the psychologist Colin DeYoung of the University of Minnesota and Jeremy Gray of Yale, who have been using a brain scanner to search for evidence of the so-called Big Five personality traits. So there is two psychologists who have been using brain scanner to search for evidence. So these five traits personality. And here's the big five traits with definition. Opponents: the tendency to appreciate new art ideas, values, feelings, and behaviors. Consciousness: the tendency to be careful on time for appointments. to follow rules, and to be hardworking. Extraversion, the tendency to be talkative, sociable, and to enjoy others, the tendency to have a dominant style. Agreeableness, the tendency to agree and go along with others rather than to assert one's own opinion and choices. Neuroticism, the tendency to frequently experience negative emotions such as anger, worry, and sadness, as well as being interpersonal sensitive. They say that these 5 traits, you can only understand this if you have a big brain. And if you have a small brain, some of only these 5 traits you can only easily understand. And unlike the big brain, they can all of these understand easily. Next is Phrenology is reintroduced to Britain by the American phrenological folder Lawrence Niall Fowler, 1811 to 1896. In the 1860s and 1870s, the Fowlers has begun lecturing and reading heads for free in New York in the 1830s. So they are the people like reading your future, reading your mind, reading your palm. However, it is only borrowed by the British modification of Gall's system. In the US, the views of phrenology, here supported by physician Charles Caldwell, 1772 to 1853, who searched for evidence that brain tissue and cells regulate human action. So he had a book who named Phrenology Vindicate and the Anti-Phrenology Unmasked. In his book, he defends that it is scientific. Louis Allen Bolt, also known as L.A. Bolt, a physiognomist, was born in 1859, and his masterpiece is Both Practical Character Reader was self-published in 1902. So this book of both is basically about Gall's work. He only just add some of explanation in Gall's work. Next topic we have is nature theory. Nature theorists assert that the etiology of criminal behavior is biologically based in genetic inheritance and the structure and function of people's brains and other psychological responses. So nature theory it's about having it in our genes. Okay? Nature theory versus nurture theory. Nature theory intelligence is largely determined genetically and that low intelligence is linked to criminal behavior. Nature theory it's in our genes. It's genetically we have. It's in our genes. Okay? However, nature theory intelligence is not inherited but it's largely a product of environment. Low IQ scores do not cause crime but may result from the same environmental factors. So, in nurture theory, it's you adapt it in an environment. You can get what is in an environment you have. Example of this is in crime. You are in an environment who have been thinking of crime. Then because you are in this because you are in their environment, there's a possibility that you can adapt their thinking about doing a crime. Psychometric tests it include measuring a range of skills from cognitive ability and knowledge to access one's personality, and the tests are an objective way to measure the potential ability of candidates to perform well in a job role. So this psychometric test is testing about your mental ability, your mental behavior, your personality. Proponent of nature theory, Henry Goddard, in his study in 1920s that may institutionalize people were what he considered feeble-minded. If we say feeble-minded is lack of sense, lack of intelligence, and and concluded that at least half all juvenile delinquents were mentally defective. So he said that half of juvenile delinquent has this kind of problem, feeble-minded. William Healy and Augusta Browner tested a group of delinquents in Chicago and Boston, and they found that 30% were subnormal in intelligence. If we say subnormal intelligence, it has 75% low IQ. Has 75% of low IQ. Our IQ average is 76 and above. I'm not sure, but I think yes. We say subnormal intelligence is about low IQ, having a 75% below IQ. They conclude that delinquent boys were 5 to 10 times more likely to be mental deficient than delinquent boys. So they say that boys are more having this kind of problem. Next, intelligence and crime. A meta-analysis of research examining the influence of cognitive and affective empathy to offending behavior found that the relationship between low empathy and offending disappeared after controlling for intelligence and socio-economic status. It is not to disregard the concept of empathy, but rather the ability to understand another person's emotion may be a primary function of intelligence, which ultimate also has link with offending. So they said that knowing the emotion of a person is the function of intelligence. Research that has aimed to examine the origin of offending behavior continues to identify low IQ as a predictor of criminal behavior. So, in their research, they examine some of people, particularly juvenile delinquency. They are the people who has been low IQ. That's because that's why rather they do a crime. Dr. Henry Goddard, after his long study of feeble-mindedness, concluded every mental deficient individual is a potential criminal. So every person who have mental deficient, it is it has a potential to commit crime. 30% of families manifesting feeble-mindedness show criminality. That sex delinquency in such family is particularly the root. So 40% of family has this kind of problem. Additionally, it has been proposed that lower IQ, especially poor verbal ability, restrict the probability of academic success at school, and this failure in academic achievement increase the likelihood of delinquent acts. So the people who been failure to academic, or people who cannot afford to go to school are the are have is potential to commit the crime because they are lack of intelligence, lack of knowledge. A body of research has also demonstrated that individuals with lower IQ levels are more likely to commit more severe and violent offenses. So, like I said lately, they are the people who have a low IQ has more to commit a crime, and sometimes they use violence because they has no idea of what they thinking. Maybe they have some kind of mental problem. Evidence exists which demonstrate that criminal offenders have lower IQs than non-offenders. So that's all for today, and here the reference where I get the knowledge about the topic that I discussed today, and quotes that I will give to you. Work harder is good, but work smarter is better. So, wag tayong magtrabaho lang magtrabaho na maigi, magpursige na maigi. Gamitin din natin yung utak natin para mapadali ang ating trabaho. That's all. Thank you.